Red Onion State Prison. There's a place in Virginia where silence isn't peaceful. It's oppressive. Where a single mistake can lock you inside a concrete room for years. And where men begin to lose track of time, and sometimes, of themselves. A faint silhouette of a narrow prison cell. A voice echoes from interviews. Former inmate, audio, distorted. If you're not careful, Red Onion will get inside your head. And once it does, it's hard to get it back. Is Red Onion State Prison one of the most isolated Supermax facilities in America? Before we deep into the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes based on verified sources. Viewer discretion is advised. Red Onion State Prison. Inside Virginia's harsh Supermax reality. Documentary. America's Silent Mountain. On the far western edge of Virginia, buried deep in the Appalachian Mountains, sits a massive concrete fortress that wasn't built to rehabilitate. It was built to contain. Red Onion State Prison opened in 1995 at a time when America believed the answer to rising violence was isolation. Extreme isolation. From the outside, it looks like a frozen industrial compound carved into the mountainside. But inside, it's a world governed by steel, surveillance, and silence. Locals call it the Mountain Prison. Advocates call it one of the harshest prisons in the United States. They have another name for it entirely. A place where the lights never truly go off. And where the world outside feels more like a memory than a destination. The architecture of isolation. To understand Red Onion, you must understand its design. This isn't a normal prison. It's a Supermax, built with one purpose. To control the most dangerous, disruptive, or vulnerable individuals through near total isolation. Cells are small concrete rooms with solid doors, minimal natural light, and a tray slot that doubles as the only real connection to the outside world. Most inmates spend 22 to 24 hours a day inside. Alone. No crowd. No conversation. No meaningful human interaction. Experts call it extended isolation. Former inmates call it something else entirely. The long freeze. Because time here doesn't move forward. It sinks. Who gets sent here? Red Onion doesn't house only the violent. It houses the unwanted. Gang members. Inmates with disciplinary issues. Individuals the state believes cannot mix with general population. Some arrive because of fights. Others because they simply couldn't navigate the politics of another prison. And then there are those placed here for their own protection, but end up facing the same isolated conditions as everyone else. Inside these walls, labels follow you. A single incident can determine your placement for years. Former officer, audio. There are guys who came in angry and the place made them worse. And then there are guys who came in quiet and the place made them disappear. A day in the box. A typical day at Red Onion begins before the sun hits the mountain peaks. The lights flick on. Breakfast arrives through the food slot. The door never opens. Hours pass. Some read. Some stare at the walls. Some talk to themselves. If you're lucky, you receive an hour of recreation in a small outdoor cage. A space barely larger than the cell you live in. No group yard. No open field. Just concrete and fencing. This is the routine. Day after day. Week after week. Year after year. Researchers say this type of environment can alter memory, mood, impulse control, and emotional stability. One psychologist who studied the prison called it the slow erosion of the self. And for many, that erosion begins faster than anyone expects. When the mind begins to crack. Ask anyone who has lived inside Red Onion long enough, and they'll tell you the same thing. Isolation isn't just physical. It's psychological. The silence grows loud. The shadows move strangely. And the mind begins to fill in the gaps. Some inmates report hearing voices. Others feel like the walls are closing in. And a few don't realize how much time has passed until they can no longer remember simple details of the outside world. This environment doesn't just punish actions. It shapes people. Sometimes breaks them. The program that decides your fate. Inside Red Onion, there is a system that every inmate learns about the moment the door closes behind them, a system known as the step-down program. On paper, it is designed to help inmates earn their way out of isolation. In reality, many describe it as an unpredictable path where one wrong move, one bad day, or even one misunderstood action can erase months of progress. The program is divided into levels. Each level promises a little more freedom. A few extra minutes out of the cell, a chance to make a phone call, maybe the opportunity to participate in a group class. But reaching the next level requires impeccable behavior, patience, and the ability to remain calm in an environment specifically designed to test your ability to stay calm. A single argument, a refusal to follow an order, even a moment of frustration can send you backward. Former inmates say the hardest part wasn't the physical isolation, it was the pressure of knowing that your future depended on the very system that was mentally wearing you down. Some describe sitting on the edge of their beds for hours, rehearsing every possible interaction with staff, making sure their tone, posture, and words couldn't be misinterpreted. Others kept journals, documenting their daily routines, their thoughts, and even their struggles, hoping that it would somehow prove they were ready to progress. But progress wasn't always guaranteed. There were men who stayed stuck at the lowest levels for years, not because of violence or ongoing troublemaking, but because their mental health had deteriorated to the point where functioning normally became impossible. How do you maintain perfect behavior when the walls seem to move, when days blend into nights, when your temper becomes shorter and your patience thinner? For those who did manage to advance, it felt like a small victory, a moment of clarity in an environment built on uncertainty. But even then, there was fear. Fear that a slip-up might undo everything. Fear that they would be pulled back into the deeper levels of isolation. Fear that they might never fully leave the cycle. Some officers acknowledged the difficulty. They knew the program demanded constant psychological control, even from individuals already struggling with trauma, anger, or untreated mental health conditions. Others believed the system was necessary to maintain order in a place where control was everything. But regardless of intention, the program shaped the lives of the men inside in profound ways. For some, it became their structure and their motivation. For others, it was a moving target they could never reach, no matter how hard they tried. And then there were the men who refused to participate at all. They believed the program was a trap, a series of hoops designed not to rehabilitate, but to test obedience. These individuals accepted the isolation, choosing not to play a game they felt was rigged. Their resistance came with consequences, longer stays, fewer privileges, and a reputation that followed them through the system. What made the step-down program so complex wasn't just the rules, it was the psychology behind it. It forced inmates to balance survival instincts with compliance, to suppress emotions in a place where emotions were often all they had left, to navigate a system that demanded calmness while providing an environment that constantly challenged it. Inside Red Onion, freedom was not simply the absence of bars. It was measured in levels, steps, and phases. And for many, reaching the top wasn't just a test of behavior, it was a test of endurance, identity, and mental resilience. The men behind the doors. Every cell inside Red Onion holds a different story, and none of them are simple. Some of the men arrived here after years of bouncing between prisons, their reputations following them from one facility to another. Others were sent here after a single violent incident that marked them as a threat. And then there were the individuals who ended up in this Supermax environment not because they were the most dangerous, but because the prison system didn't know where else to put them. Inside these concrete rooms, the differences between them begin to fade. The street identities, the gang affiliations, the past conflicts, all of it slowly dissolves as the long hours of isolation strip away the outer layers of personality. What remains is the reality of human behavior under pressure. Everyone reacts differently. Some men cope by building routines. They wake up early. They exercise in tight circles on the floor. They read whatever books manage to find their way into their possession. These routines become lifelines, small anchors that give shape to days that would otherwise float by without distinction. One man described counting the tiny holes in the air vent every morning, starting over at 0 each day, because it gave him something to focus on. Others create their own worlds through imagination. They replay memories of their childhood or imagine themselves somewhere far away. A few cling to relationships on the outside, family letters, occasional phone calls, which become precious reminders that life still exists beyond the walls. But not everyone has someone waiting for them, and for those who don't, the silence becomes heavier. There are also the men who pace their cells for hours, walking back and forth until their legs ache. Movement becomes their meditation, the only way to escape the crushing stillness around them. Some talk to themselves. Others shout at the walls. A few slip into long periods of silence, refusing to speak even when spoken to. Staff and inmates alike could see the psychological changes, though they rarely had the tools to address them. Not all behavior was coping. Some men lashed out. Isolation can fuel anger the way oxygen fuels fire. A simple misunderstanding with staff could spiral into shouting, banging on the doors, or refusing to return a food tray. These reactions weren't always signs of defiance. They were signs of pressure building with nowhere to release. Still, even in the darkest environments, moments of humanity surfaced. A guard offering a second blanket during a cold winter. Two inmates communicating through vents or drain pipes, sharing stories or advice. A volunteer from the outside sending books, hoping someone inside might feel seen, even just for a moment. These small gestures became symbolic reminders that, even in a place designed for control and containment, the human spirit pushed back in quiet ways. The men inside Red Onion were not all the monsters the public might imagine. Many were deeply flawed individuals shaped by violence, trauma, poverty, and past mistakes. Others were simply lost, caught in cycles of behavior they didn't fully understand. A few were genuinely dangerous and required strict supervision. But all of them, regardless of their past, were living through conditions that tested the edges of what a person could endure. Behind each door was a man learning, sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully, what prolonged isolation does to the mind. Some emerged more disciplined. Some emerged more troubled. And some didn't emerge at all, not physically, but mentally. But every cell had a story. And the deeper you look, the more you begin to understand how places like Red Onion shape the people within them, for better or for worse. When the outside world starts to fade. For most people, time is measured through movement, jobs, routines, seasons, relationships, responsibilities. But inside Red Onion, where every day looks exactly like the day before it, time becomes something else entirely. It stops feeling linear. It becomes heavy, foggy, and circular. Men begin to lose their sense of how long they've been in their cells. Some even forget the exact year. One of the most common experiences described by former inmates is the slow fading of the outside world. At first, they try to keep track of everything: the weather through a tiny window, holidays marked by a meal that's slightly different, the faint sound of fireworks on the 4th of July. But after months of isolation, these markers blur. Seasons pass unnoticed. Days melt together. Even memories that once felt sharp begin to soften at the edges. For some, the fading begins with people. A cousin who used to write stops writing. A friend who promised to stay in touch disappears. Romantic relationships often collapse under the weight of distance and limited communication. When phone calls are rare and visits nearly impossible, connections break easily. Then, memories of the world itself begin to shift. One man described forgetting what traffic sounds like, how cars honk, how engines rumble, how crowds murmur. Another said he couldn't remember the smell of fresh air or the feeling of rain. These are things most people never imagine losing, yet inside Red Onion, they slip away quietly, replaced by the constant scent of concrete, steel, and disinfectant. Some inmates experience a strange disconnect, a moment when they suddenly realize they no longer picture the outside world clearly. Streets they once walked down turn blurry in their minds. Faces of loved ones become harder to visualize. Even their own bodies feel unfamiliar, as if they're trapped in versions of themselves that haven't grown or changed with time. For others, the fading world outside creates a sense of fear. They worry about how much society has changed. They question whether they will still fit in when they're released. Technology moves fast. Phones, cars, everyday life. A man who entered prison in the early 2000s and left decades later described seeing a smartphone for the first time and feeling like he had stepped into a different planet. Isolation erodes not just memory, but identity. Without social interaction, feedback, or meaningful experiences, it becomes difficult to maintain a stable sense of self. Some inmates talked about feeling like they were dissolving, like their personalities were being sanded down by the endless routine. Without external anchors, their thoughts turned inward, recycling worries, regrets, and imagined scenarios until they no longer knew which ones were real. There were also moments when the outside world came crashing back unexpectedly. A letter from a family member announcing a death. A newspaper clipping slipped under a door describing a world that had moved on without them. These moments could be devastating, reminders that life continues even if you are frozen in time. But perhaps the most haunting part of this slow fade is that most inmates don't realize it's happening until it's too late. Someone might ask them a simple question, "What year was it when you came in?" And they find themselves unable to answer. Or they look in the mirror one morning and realize they don't recognize the person staring back at them. Inside Red Onion, the outside world doesn't disappear all at once. It fades quietly, inch by inch, until a man wakes up one day and realizes that the world he remembers is gone, and the world he now lives in is a place where time stands still. The silent struggle with mental health. Inside Red Onion, the line between coping and breaking is thin. Mental health issues do not take breaks, and in an environment designed for isolation, they often intensify. Anxiety, depression, and paranoia can escalate rapidly, fueled by the constant hum of fluorescent lights, the echo of distant doors, and the endless hours alone. Inmates who may have once managed their conditions with therapy, medication, or support now find themselves stripped of nearly all resources and human contact. Some turn inward, attempting to control their thoughts through strict routines or obsessive behaviors. Counting steps, monitoring breathing, or rehearsing conversations becomes a lifeline. Others struggle to maintain any sense of stability. Sleep cycles collapse. Eating patterns become erratic. Emotional outbursts, sometimes mild and sometimes severe, erupt without warning, triggered by the smallest disruptions or reminders of past trauma. Isolation also magnifies past trauma. Men who endured violence, neglect, or abuse before arriving at Red Onion find that the prison amplifies those memories. Nightmares become more vivid. Flashbacks intrude into waking moments. In some cases, inmates begin questioning their own sanity, unsure whether what they perceive is real or a symptom of the environment around them. Mental health deterioration is not uniform. Some adapt, creating a fragile equilibrium between their thoughts and the structure of their daily routines. Others succumb, overwhelmed by the relentless psychological pressure. Staff members, while trained for security, often have little ability to intervene therapeutically. The system is built to contain, not to heal. As a result, psychiatric crises become inevitable for many who spend years under such conditions. Dr. Craig Haney's research highlighted the alarming effects of prolonged Supermax confinement. Inmates displayed symptoms that ranged from severe depression and anxiety to cognitive impairment and emotional numbness. Some lost the ability to engage socially even when finally permitted to interact with others. Others reported persistent feelings of unreality, detachment from their own bodies, or the sense that time itself had no meaning. These psychological scars often follow men long after their release, shaping their reintegration into society, or making it nearly impossible. Despite the challenges, resilience does exist. Inmates develop coping strategies, sometimes in the form of writing, drawing, or limited social connections through cell vents or small group programs. These acts of self-preservation can provide a lifeline, allowing some to endure the worst years of their confinement without entirely losing themselves. But such resilience is fragile, and the environment is designed to test it every single day. Red Onion is not just a prison. It is an experiment in human endurance, a place where mental health is continually tested, where psychological resilience is a requirement for survival, and where the human mind is pushed to its limits in ways few can imagine. Reflections beyond the walls. Red Onion State Prison is more than concrete, steel, and razor wire. It is a mirror of extremes, a place where human behavior is tested, identities are stripped down, and the limits of psychological endurance are constantly challenged. What happens inside these walls does not stay inside. The echoes of isolation, the subtle and profound transformations of the mind, follow men long after they leave. Some carry trauma that lasts a lifetime. Others emerge changed, often humbled, sometimes hardened, always marked by the experience. But there is a larger lesson here. Red Onion exists as a symbol of how society chooses to deal with danger, disorder, and fear. It shows what happens when punishment and containment are prioritized over rehabilitation, when fear dictates design, and when humanity can be stretched to the edge of endurance. Behind every cell is a man with a story, an identity, a past, a future that may never fully recover from the silence. The walls of Red Onion are unyielding, but they cannot fully erase the human spirit. Even in the deepest isolation, glimpses of hope, resilience, and connection remain. Letters, books, conversations through vents, a shared memory, all small acts of resistance against an environment built to suppress them. As the doors close behind each new inmate, and as the lights flicker across concrete cells, the question remains: what is the cost of keeping a society safe when the price is the minds of those we confine? Red Onion forces us to confront that question, not just about prisons, but about the values we choose to uphold and the human consequences of those choices. In the end, this story is not only about the prison itself, it is about the fragile, enduring, and complicated nature of humanity. It is a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the mind struggles to adapt, survive, and in some ways, resist. And it is a call for reflection on the systems we build, the people they contain, and the legacy they leave behind. Every cell has a story. Every story has a consequence. Remember the human behind the bars.